Okay, well, hello everyone, and welcome to a mini lecture. This one will be very short, I hope, and the plan is to have it be 4 short segments, all on YouTube as part of a YouTube um, playlist, so it'll be a little easier to deal with in terms of the size of the files and so forth. So basically, this is next to our last class, but really it's the last class in which I think I'll be talking very much about Romanticism or the Romantic. And I sort of want to end on a slightly political note. I want to suggest that occupation and resistance are 2 aspects that sort of continue on as part of the Romantic, and I want to sort of talk about 3 main writers, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, William Wordsworth, and Percy Bysshe Shelley. Very quickly, just to sort of connect what we already know about them. I'm not going to say very much new. Rousseau, we looked at his Confessions mostly, but I wanted to call attention to his very important Romantic statement that he puts at the beginning of The Social Contract. He writes, "Man is born free and everywhere is in chains." Of course, we translate that now into people are born free and everywhere they are in chains. I think that unfortunately this holds as much true now as it did when he wrote this in the 18th century. But the idea is that a sort of liberation movement might be part of the Romantic. So again, occupation and resistance is connected to liberation. And I've probably said this before, but I was struck when I was learning Latin that the word liber or liber is connected to both freedom and also childhood. And I think this is a very Romantic motif, that freedom and childhood are seen together. Certainly for Rousseau they were, who wrote the famous text on childhood called Emile. The next thinker, of course, is William Wordsworth, and we'll look more at his sort of way of thinking. The one thing I would say that would be different is that Wordsworth's Romanticism, what he gives us of the Romantic, is more conservative, I would say, than Shelley. And we'll see when we look at 2 April Mornings. We'll sort of see how his brand of occupation and resistance are different. His is very much based on a tradition, on feeling a part of something and making oneself aware of the deep connection and interconnections that we have. It's not so much about a political movement or fighting back in the way that Shelley or Rousseau might have recognized. And of course, Shelley will look at England, 1819. 1819 being a pivotal year, just in terms of the kinds of movements that happened in England, and this is what Shelley was responding to. So next I'll sort of jump down and I'll talk a little bit about occupation and resistance. Basically what I did is put some notes up here for myself, and I just thought I'd talk through them. Occupation, obviously, the way we think about this is in terms of either an invading army or people who are trying to reappropriate what they believe is their own. So occupation can either be a form of colonialism, or it can also be a sort of reappropriation. And what I was thinking about in terms of reappropriation is the sort of various Occupy movements that happened about 5 or 6 years ago. Occupy Wall Street, Occupy courthouses, etc. The idea was basically that these are our spaces, they are public spaces, and they have been given back to the rich and the powerful and corporations, etc., and we should reclaim them as our own. So it is this second definition of occupation, I think, more than the colonial one, that really is the romantic that I think that we can see still continuing on, this reappropriation. But again, so let's think about this. So I wrote down here, resistance etymologically means to stand against. Residence means to occupy or to live in, and insistence means to persist, to dwell upon and stand upon. And I suppose what I'm suggesting is that these three things, might be thought of as a kind of political aspect of the romantic that continues on. Okay? So that would mean something like a reappropriation or a radical reappropriation of the very things that do belong to us in the first place. So if the nation really is ours, if we as workers create the wealth, for example, then we have the right to that wealth, or at least to a portion of that wealth, or certainly a larger portion than we currently have. That would be one way of thinking about this occupation. But it also might mean like a reappropriation of aesthetic forms or language, or here's another example of reappropriation that my daughter was telling me about. She was talking about the way in which she's been working out, and she's noticed that she started lifting weights, and her body image changed when she started lifting weights. She stopped thinking about the most beautiful thing as being the skinniest person and started thinking about the most beautiful body as being the strongest, most resilient body. And that was a big change for her. And she noticed that there were a lot of other women that were beginning to do this, young women beginning to lift weights. And she liked it. She felt it was a kind of taking back of power. And if it is a kind of reappropriation of the image of the female body by women, then that would be a sort of aspect of the romantic that sort of gets included there. In terms of different genres, I sort of suggested my note here to myself when I'm speaking to you to say that one genre of the romantic would be something that does the unexpected. So whenever you think something should zig, it zags. So an example of that might be poems like Intimations on Immortality, a poem that you expect to end by saying, so what's really great is immortality, and instead Wordsworth writes, what's really great are the things we can't quite grasp. Immortality is awesome, but he praises even higher what he calls vanishings, blank misgivings, these things that fall away from us. So that would be the sort of unexpected. A genre of protest, I was thinking of the David Foster Wallace commencement speech, which we may or may not listen to on Thursday. And then finally the genre of a pop song or a poem. All of these sort of genres might be also reappropriations or ways in which we resist what's expected. So again, that might be one way to understand the final way that I'm thinking about these repetitions of the romantic as being ultimately political.